Hello.
Hello, everyone.
We're live here, another
We
Facebook
are.
Live. Yeah, I'm
Yep.
here with my awesome colleague Justyn.
And my awesomer colleague, Tanuja.
And,
Gunchal.
yeah, we're going to be talking about resumes and how to really use your resume to really make your brand stand out and to showcase your offerings.
Yeah, and this is not going to be the regular resume conversations that I think everybody's had, right? So it's got to have, obviously, no errors and spelling mistakes, and you've got to communicate effectively out of that stuff. But we are really going to talk about what the resume is and give a different sort of mindset and framing so that students or whoever is coming to the resume and understanding the resume in a very, very different way.
Yes.
And then being able to take action.
Yeah, and
right?
this is where you can come in and work with your career advisor to make sure
Absolutely.
that you're putting in place what we're talking about and having a stellar resume that you're going out and applying for jobs.
Yeah.
The jobs with.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Totally.
So let's start off with that, Justyn. In terms
Yeah.
of like, how would you define a resume?
So the resume is really just is a communication tool. It's a branding tool, and ultimately it's a messaging tool that everyone individually owns. You own the message. You own what you want to say. You own the communication that you want people to leave with after reading that resume.
Right.
Because oftentimes people feel like it has to be this very succinct and very, very specific chronological sort of spewing of information. That's everything.
And I have to get everything on my
And you gotta
resume.
get everything in there, right?
And then,
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
and then the margins are
Right.
like it's like everything is touching the end of the
and the font size is like 9.26, you know, because you have to get everything in there, right? And it's sort of like you've got somebody who's like, well, I was a project manager, and then I was this account person, and then by the way, I volunteered doing this, and then by the way, I'm also doing this with a club, and it's just putting everything out there because it's a kind of a thoughtless process, right?
Right.
So
Right.
that's the problem.
And I see this all the time where students come in and they want to jam pack their resume with everything because this was important when they were doing that job.
Right.
And I say, you know, and this is oftentimes I speak with international students and they come in and, you know, I say you won't come in and you won't speak another language to me because I barely understand English, but that's the only language I speak. So when you come in, that's what you're speaking to me. It's the same thing with employers. They're not there to hire people. They're there to provide value to the people they serve, their customers, their clients.
Yeah.
And you have to frame this in a way that's important to them. So basically speaking their language.
Absolutely, exactly, and you want to, and if you think of this also with the end user in mind, who's the reader or the recruiter, you want to make it as easy for them to say yes to you.
Yes.
Right. So that I've sitting with one student even just very recently, I sat back and asked, what do you think your resume says to the reader? And his response was, well, I'm hardworking, I can be creative, etc. And ultimately, sort of like, is that what they're looking for, though, when they're looking for a marketing intern? They want to see some marketing work, or they want to see an understanding of marketing.
Right.
The other stuff, they're not going to figure out.
So this is context. This is basically
Absolutely.
about context and making sure that, you know, it's not including everything in your background. It's only including the relevant things. And this is also where you're demonstrating your value. What is it that's important to me? Because you do have, I mean, most of you are in your 20s, 30s, you know, it's like you have had a long history of doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
How do you fit that into a piece of paper, one sheet of paper, to show that I am the person that you want to hire to do this job?
Absolutely. And then ultimately, too, you want to also show that you've got some value to offer, because everybody does. I mean, even at students who potentially are doing a big career shift, they still have transferable value that they can add to an organization or to an internship or to a full-time role. But it's really got to be within that context of what that role is.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is where we start talking about having a targeted resume. And oftentimes I see students wanting to fit everything in their resume. And I say, hold up, what are we trying to do here? So they may want to get into a financial analyst position, and then they may also be exploring audit positions. Those are two separate resumes for me. Don't try to put everything on one resume. You can have multiple versions of your resumes.
In fact, you should.
You should.
Especially
yes.
if you've got multiple targets.
Yes.
If you've got one
exactly.
target, then that makes sense that you would have one. But you're going to need to make things that are really, really targeted and really tailored, because that's what you have to do to be successful.
So first of all, knowing what you're targeting, that's the first part. And the second thing, what does that ideal candidate look like for that target role? So once you identify what does this person look like, what is the identity of this person, what is the brand of that person, what is it that they're bringing to the table? Okay, so now how do I match that? And how do I use my resume to showcase that? Because when somebody's looking at the resume, they don't have you in front of them, and they're making a judgment based on that.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole point of the resume is to get you an interview.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the sort of like one of the indicators or one of the clues you can get if you have a problem sort of thinking, okay, what does that person look like?
Mm-hmm.
It's the job description,
Right.
right? So
Right.
ultimately being able to look at the job description and see, okay, what do I have on here and what don't I have?
Mm-hmm.
And then from the things that you know you don't have, are there transferable things that maybe you could actually position to make transferable?
Right. And any questions you have anytime in this, in this session,
Yeah.
please type them in the comment box or let us know, if there's something in here that's resonating with you. We would love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
And we want to make you a part of this process as well, because that's why we're doing it.
Yeah.
So thank you again so much for being a part of this Facebook Live with us. And please feel free to ask any questions you have.
Which would be great.
Yes.
And then I think the third thing on the resume target that we always talk about is, okay, great, so you know where you want to go and what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
You sort of have an understanding of what are the important skills, but then differentiating yourself with your results. How can you quantify the impact that you've made when applying your skills somewhere?
Right.
Right?
So this is where you want to have, not just if you're, for example, a taxation student, prepare tax returns. Like that's it's a crappy way to state that on your resume. You want to be able to quantify
Exactly.
how many tax returns did you prepare for what states.
Exactly.
Like you want to talk about deductions and credits or whatever is relevant to
Totally.
them. Making sure that you're being very specific.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
schedule did you use when you were preparing the tax returns, right? And how
Yeah.
many months did you do this? Think about, again, quantifying in ways of scale. So that could be a number, that could be a date range, that could be certainly dollar amounts. And remember that everything doesn't have to go up in order to or increase in order to be a good metric. Things can go down,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
So you could decrease some sort of metric too. So think about quantifying in different ways. It's not only just one way up, right? So it can be a lot of different
And
ways.
you want to think about this even before you start writing your resume. So I actually do have a resume building template that I share with students, and it's the first thing is, what is this role that I was doing? What was I doing? Because I see a lot of students coming in with resumes and they stop at what. So it looks like when I look at their resume, it looks like a to-do list that I could have given a kindergartner to do, and I'm like, I wouldn't have known the difference between you
Right.
doing this or a 5-year-old doing this. And that's where we need to separate that, right? How did you do it? Why did you do it? What expertise did you need to draw on to do this? What were the tools that you used to do it? And then finally, what's the result that you got? And based on that, you frame your bullet.
Exactly.
Based on that. And the other thing I want to say in terms of your bullets on your resume is that you always want to prioritize your bullets. So for each role that you're putting on your resume, put the most important thing for that role and for that company at the top, and then some of the things you can end up eliminating, but making sure that when somebody's looking at that first bullet, it actually represents
Absolutely.
somebody who could do well in that job.
Yep, and that again, goes back to our initial point: is you control the message, so you can move your bullets and you can highlight the bullets that are most important to your end user because you control the message of your resume. One example of a student, for example, who's studying HR. HR doesn't come into her resume until below the fold, so below the half mark of the resume. And I can tell you that one of the reasons why she's not getting called is because nobody knows that she wants to actually get into HR. She just kind of looks like the student I'm not sure she's going into HR. And I can tell you that recruiters probably won't even get that far. Right?
So using that term, the terms that are relevant in your industry, because I'm even looking at the resume right now in front of me where a student is coming with a background in chemistry and is telling me he wants to get into audit, but has no idea how to make that, transition. And when we looked at his resume in, first glance, it doesn't look like, because he's talking about drug purification process, and I'm going to put this in front of an audit professional, or even like a recruiter, and they're going to be like, this has nothing to do with audit. but then we were able to actually, in talking to him and in like just basically going through this Q&A process with him, realize that what he was doing was looking at compliance, looking at if stuff matched internal controls, and
Right.
those are terms that are so relevant in audit. So this is something that's so transferable. So sometimes you can get caught up in those specificities, I guess, of a job that's not relevant to where you're going. But there's gold there in terms of that you can extract and make it very relevant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those are the transferable skills and transferable experiences. And then just to highlight that, when somebody's coming from a background, we have plenty of students who are coming from say engineering, or they're doing career switching from say education, right? So when you start putting out like water purification drugs, or classroom, or potentially like 5th grade students. This is noise that distracts and can detract the reader from actually where you want them to go.
Right.
And so potentially removing those words alone and just focusing on what the core skill set that you think is transferable that you can bring from that experience, right?
Because then you don't want me to go on Google and then I get lost on the internet rather than
Right.
coming back to
Right.
because I'm like, what is water
Exactly.
purification? So
Right.
making sure that you're keeping things in context and making sure you're sticking to the role and
Right.
what you're targeting. And we do have a question from Abdullah. Hey, Abdullah.
Hi, Abdullah.
So is it okay to put a career professional summary on the top of a resume for grad students with past experience? If yes, then what would you suggest for people whose experience are in diverse sectors and industries?
Yeah. So my thoughts on this, and this is from my recruiting days especially, is usually career summaries I don't find to be very effective unless you really need sort of that extra space to position yourself for a role that you're going in where you don't have too much experience or even transferable skills. And more often than not, I don't think that students really need that. From a recruiter's perspective, in my background, I would just go into experience and possibly education to basically look at where has this person applied these skills in a way that has also created change or made impact.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times with students, right, because you don't have that much experience and you don't have a lot going on in your resume, it's a summary already. It's like it's very easy to go through that, so you don't need it. There are times that I've used it with with some of our students who have like a lot of experience, and they're looking to extract certain things. So I sometimes I use core competencies at the top where I put like some bullets and I say these are the areas that I want to highlight, or professional highlights. And if you're, for example, a career switcher and you might want to emphasize some of those skills that you have that are transferable, I would recommend it, but I think it's very specialized and it's from case by case basis. I don't recommend it for everyone.
For everyone, and that's a good point. Is even people who are extremely experienced that really need to sort of bring the recruiter or bring the reader into a specific area that is applicable to that role.
I don't recommend like a paragraph because I see students writing a whole paragraph, experienced professional with, who was accomplished, blah, blah, blah. And for me, that's a turn off when I look at a resume because it's all claims and it's not evidence. As opposed to like really here, if you want to say passed all 4 parts of the CPA exam, that's evidence, that's not a claim. Or you can say something as strong academic background, graduate, like a student who graduated from Harvard, that's something I put at the top of her resume because that was something that really differentiated her. So you want to make sure that it's evidence and it's not like great organizational skills hardworking,
enthusiastic team player.
Because that for me that's a turn off. It comes across as somebody who is very arrogant. They're making a claim, but they don't have anything to back it up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I hope that answered your question, Abdullah. Thank you for the
question.
question.
Awesome. So in terms of the resume, as we said, it should be very targeted, right?
Yes.
And this means like it's not one size fits all.
Totally, and it's got to be targeted. And I think one of the things that's important too is that as any student, even though you're close to your resume, try to step back with your resume and think, okay, if I were a recruiter and reading this resume, not knowing who I am, how does this position me? What would I think this person is if I could put it into like one word? This person is a boom. And if you can't actually answer and say, yeah, it really answers what I'm looking for, then you need to change things. And this is where planning and sort of thinking about your headings and thinking about the structure of your resume now becomes really important.
Right.
I mean, you mentioned about put the most important and relevant things up front. That's relevant to your job search or for whatever you're looking for, right? And that's really important too. I think one of the things too is when you're thinking about students who are doing maybe a career change or career shift, and they're going, say, from engineering, and now they want to get into digital marketing, and they have no applicable digital marketing skills. One thing I see is that marketing doesn't even come up on the resume until down in their activities section because they're in a club or they've gone to do something. But they're leaving off that their MBA, even though there's no major in an MBA, that they've got a concentration within marketing. They could even say the concentration is within digital marketing. And in the educational section, they have an opportunity to discuss, okay, what are maybe 2 or 3 specific classes I've taken? Mm-hmm. And maybe in those classes, I can describe one of my projects, right? And I can also, because especially within marketing, is so we're all kind of big about brands, right? So you could have an opportunity within these projects. They're usually around theoretical big brands, theoretical project within big brands. You can start putting in Starbucks because I worked on Starbucks, or we worked on this Clorox thing, right? And you can pepper things in there that are important and show that you can start to speak like a marketer.
Exactly.
Right?
So moving those, as we were talking about the transferable terms, the like all of the skills to the top. So again, when somebody's looking at this resume, they don't have any doubt about the identity of this person.
Yeah, and this is so. Now, Harshita just asked us a question. Actually, if I have 0 work experience in my related field, what should I do to make my resume stand out? This is exactly that,
yes.
Right? So you actually need to start looking at, especially since you're investing from an educational perspective, to start making yourself relevant in a field. Mm-hmm. So start talking about the things you're doing in your classroom. Start talking about those projects. Start actually detailing them as if they were bullet points in your experience section.
I absolutely agree. I
right?
mean, I think look at everything that you have, because you do have a lot in terms of academic, because obviously if you're studying marketing, you have projects in your mm-hmm. classes. So using the coursework you've done, the technical skills that you're developing, whether they're in Coursera or mm-hmm. here at Baruch, and there may be workshops you've taken at the Subotnick Center. So including all of those things, including the experience you have working at, or being part of a club, include experience you have volunteering at New York Hears or anywhere else. Like all of those things matter once it supports you as a candidate for that role.
Exactly. And then even though Harshita is talking about 0 work experience that's related in the field, so all of the work experience you have, then you have to be judicious about how much of that detracts from what I want the reader to think about me, so that you stop talking about the water filtration systems
yes.
and the pharma stuff, and you start to minimize that noise so that people don't read that.
Mm-hmm. Right, because because sometimes you see that and it just like, that's not relevant to my field, and it's like the resume just goes out, just because you didn't take the time to work on this.
Right.
So that's super important in terms of that.
And the important part about this too is that this needs to be an honest process. Like, you're not making things up. That's the most important thing here too, is you're using things that you're learning in classrooms or that you actually have done in volunteer mm-hmm. projects. You're minimizing certain things from your past experience, not because you're trying to lie about them. You're not lying at all. You're just not talking about them in ways in which they're highlighted very effectively. The other thing too is, it's important that we all have backgrounds, and when you have work experience, you really have to, and this is where you can work with a career advisor who can help you to dig out the transferable things, because mm-hmm. I find 9 times out of 10, a student actually minimizes the work experience they've had and doesn't see the transferable part. And it's at no fault of theirs. I do the same thing, right? Because we're so close.
Exactly.
We're so close to it. It's like, there's no way this is transferable. Work with somebody at the GCMC, like a career advisor, who can then probe with the right questions mm-hmm. and really get deep into, wait a second, this sounds really transferable.
Right. And also sometimes I can see students who don't want to talk about their accomplishments because they feel it's boasting. So that's where I think, boasting again is coming in and saying, I was the greatest financial analyst at Merrill Lynch. I mean, which is very far-fetched. But if you can say that I was able, to reduce costs by $30,000 in my department, that's something you want to emphasize, because not because it makes you seem like you're boasting, but for the employer to see that you can add value to them. So make it about that other person, because if you focus on yourself and like, oh, I'm shy and I don't want to share my accomplishments, then you're shortchanging yourself and you're denying them that opportunity to really come in and do something that you want to do.
Absolutely.
So don't don't think this is the place where you're shy, because this is a marketing tool and you want to be able to show the value that you have to offer.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In terms of like, just we talked about this earlier, just keeping it to one page. We recommend as a student keeping it to one page and having breathing room. Like, don't try to crowd, like put everything on your resume.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Less bullets is actually sometimes more.
Mm-hmm. So I think we have another question. If I don't have as much school activities because I'm working full-time while full-time at school, how can I emphasize that both activities were full-time, since not too many employees assume that? So thank you, Christina, for that question. And I think I met Christina yesterday. So Christina, here's the thing. I say under education, I actually usually just put a bullet and I say working full-time while going to school full-time.
Yeah. And I'm not sure too, Christina, one of the questions would be too, is the concern that you want to show school activities for a specific reason on your resume? So what's the goal of putting the school activities on your resume? And that's the important thing to ask. So if, for example, and I don't know if this is it, if Christina is somebody who's trying to do a career change while working full-time and going to school full-time, and so wants to show some change, that's where then your school activities through classrooms are going to be
the projects,
the things to focus on. Yeah, I mean, it may not be really important to have school activities. It's really about what are you learning in school specifically and concretely.
Yeah, because I think if you're going to school full-time and you're working full-time, that's that for me shows time management skills.
Sure.
That's huge. So I think you don't have to try to do everything. You don't have to have like all of these sections on your resume. It's what's relevant, what makes you stand out, and what are the things that you need to emphasize. So that's it.
Yeah.
Can we get PDFs of your resumes from Elements? I'm not sure what that means. Element.
Thanks for that question. I'm assuming that's for Tanuja and my resumes. I have not updated my resume in a long time.
My resume, I haven't updated my resume in a long time either, because the last time I think I
did it was applying here. So
applying here, and my resume does have a lot of stuff from financial services, which I won't include anymore in my resume because that's not what I'm targeting at all.
But I can. So it's a great question. So for example, like let me talk about. I think we can both talk about how we both came from corporate and how the application though of our resumes did need to really shift when we were applying.
Right.
Certainly for a higher ed position, but then how does it actually apply also within a career center environment? So it's not just using then our corporate resumes, right? So my background was digital marketing as well as recruiting. So the role ended up being, okay, I have to really minimize my digital marketing background, where I will have, conversion rates, agencies that I partnered with on specific projects, the duration of some of the launches that I did, how much they cost, so what budgets I was using, some of the QA times of getting things live, optimization strategies, things like that became less important for my role, and it really became suddenly my recruiting role was actually what it was about, right? So the firms that I actually serviced as a recruiter, how many candidates I pipelined within a specific amount of time, how many even candidates that were placed specifically, how much revenue was generated over that time as well, but overseeing the team when I was overseeing the team, the diversity of clients and industries, so industry verticals and also even horizontals, but ultimately those were the important messages to actually focus on that when I applied.
Yeah, and I remember because I'm coming from a financial services background, and I've worked in ING and asset management. I've worked in equity derivatives at Lehman Brothers, and then I worked in basically in IT technology management function at Societe Generale. And first of all, having that background in financial services was important in terms of me being a career advisor in a business school.
Right.
So that was certainly important, but there were certain things I did in those roles, like, in my equity derivatives roles where I was like doing risk management, not so important. So it ended up being one bullet to show,
Exactly.
like a broad statement about what I did there. For same thing for ING, it's one bullet, very broad statement about what I did there. And then when I looked at my technology management role, I took out certain things like the coaching of project managers or the organizational change management where I was working with staff globally and training staff globally, because
Super
that's very
important.
relevant
Yep.
to the role that I was going to be taking on as a career advisor here, and making sure that I was targeting my resume for that role. So showing the financial services experience, showing the training and the coaching experience, and then what I started highlighting as well, I was a mentor here in the EOC program at Baruch. That became relevant because it shows that I had experience working closely, coaching students at Baruch already, and bringing in my coaching certification and all of that. So it wasn't so much necessarily what I did, but how was that going to be important in terms of the role I was going to take on here
Absolutely.
at Baruch. Like, so certain things like I did, like where I use Excel for, analysis and all of that, like those things where I didn't go in depth as I would if I were applying for some job in regression analysis,
Or
which
business
or
analyst
something like that. So
Yeah.
so that's in terms of me framing my resume for the position. And that's not to say that I didn't do those things. I did those things, but again, this is a marketing tool that you're targeting to make sure that you are positioning yourself for the role that you want.
That you want.
Yeah, and that's how you end up at the role you want, and not something that
That you don't want.
Yeah, that somebody thinks because his resume looks like he's applying for jobs as a tax accountant, and I'll get him that, when that's not what you want.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So thanks, Element. That was a great question.
No, you're inspiring me to go.
I know.
Work on my resume. Awesome. So the thing is, in terms of your resume, you want your personality to come through. You want somebody to look at this piece of paper and they know, who you, get a feel for who you are, get a feel for the value that you're bringing to this organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that we will touch on, and I will touch on, certainly the stuff that I think sometimes comes at the beginning of the resume conversation, because I think the conversation we're having is actually much more macro to really change how you're thinking about the resume. But then, really micro, the bullets, the formatting, things have to be pristinely consistent.
Right.
Because I can tell you from a recruiter, if anything is inconsistent, that means your bullets are all ending up with periods, and then there's 2 or 3 that don't. That is a problem. Or there are different font sizes, and the font size differentiation isn't consistent. Or it obviously becomes pretty obvious that you don't know how to use Word.
Right.
Because there are some things that are just off skew, or you've got a couple of bullets where all of the letters are switched together, but everyone else all the other bullets in your resume, the spacing between letters is completely different. I see this every day, and I can tell you that these are the resumes that end up in the shredder.
Right, because attention to detail matters.
Yeah.
The fact that you care so much about this process to spend the time to really work on it matters.
Yeah.
And it shows your communication skills, it shows your organization skills, it shows your how are you a critical thinker? Do you think about these things before you put them on paper? Like, if you're gonna include things that are not relevant, and I am looking at this and I'm like, why is that even there? Like, did you actually look at the job description?
Right.
And make sure your resume is tailored for that. So these little details do matter.
Absolutely.
And I know when I look at a resume and if I see a spelling error, it's like, I'm done.
Bye-bye.
Like, I'm done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any pet peeves, though, on them? I'll tell you one of mine.
Yeah.
So one of mine is, and I love things like extracurricular activities, or things that make me quirky, or things that make candidates sort of stand out. Like, they'll be like yoga, scuba diving, and I bench press, right? And so sometimes those can be great. I think if you're gonna go down that route of, like, I love hiking and I love puppies and things like that, pick one that is really deep, has a really deep story that you can talk about, and then end it there. Because certainly somebody might pick it out, but then they're going to be like, oh, well, what do you like scuba diving? Like, oh, well, I did it once.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's great. You've got to have a story here. Even just last year, somebody had put on there that they had won a challenge in which a employer had told me that from interviewing a student, they had put on that they had won a challenge, they had won some money to start this business idea, right? And so they put that on their resume. It was great. And this really speaks to being able to back up a story that's deep and meaningful when you put something on your resume. And they asked, well, so where are you with the idea and the business? And now that you got money, now you've got this idea, like, so where are you in the process? And the answer was, oh, well, we haven't started yet.
Yeah, which also speaks volumes of
yes,
the person
right.
who you are.
Right, exactly. And so now the concern is like, oh my gosh, I'm not sure what this person's going to be doing. And yet it's in the resume and it's highlighted. So again, be really judicious about what you put on the resume because it's fair game.
Yeah, so in terms of some of my pet peeves, I think, the summary again, where it's a highly motivated individual who has achieved a lot in their career, like those things for me, it right as soon as I see a sentence like that, I'm done.
Yeah.
I think as well, if you're putting languages and putting English there, I question whether you really know English, because the fact that you're applying for a job where you're required to speak English and you're putting English there, for me, if I put Spanish, it's because I'm not that great at Spanish. It's so I say don't put English in your language section of the resume, and I agree about the interest. Like, don't put things like you like reading. Some feedback also that's been pretty good we've received from recruiters as well is also going a step further to quantify your technical skills. So students will sometimes put in on technical skills things and applications or technology that they might be learning in class, right? So they've gone through a class and they've done SPSS, right? But the SPSS, really, your understanding of SPSS is probably pretty basic. You're going to want to put in there, like with parentheses next to SPSS, basic, or SAS, basic knowledge. And basic knowledge would be pretty much like you've had a classroom exposure, maybe on one project, and that's kind of it. Whereas an intermediate knowledge of something, say, would be something where you've used it with frequency and you can get back on really quick and just jump in, right? And other things that I see, like in terms of a resume where a student says, leverage strong communication skills to deal with customers. And for me, it has no context for me.
None.
If you're saying leverage obviously you have to speak to them, so that's communication skills right there. Don't just put those things to highlight skills. Like, show me how exactly you've used that skills, like use those skills, like in terms of resolving issues, in terms of returning calls within 12 hours, like those types of things, rather than saying leveraging communication skills, because it says nothing to me. I have no context for that.
Totally.
Yeah, so context is super, super important.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we have a lot more that we could share. In terms of getting into the specifics, as we said, this is more at the macro level.
Right.
And this is where you can really work with a career advisor to get really targeted with your resume, but this is where you also have to be clear about what you want, and and the brand that you're looking to really create here. And
ultimately, I think from our conversation is you are the one that owns and sort of oversees that message. Right?
And this is where you have total control over your career. It's not about them, it's about how you really market yourself, and how do you tailor your resume for the jobs that you want.
That is an honest way also for
honest.
Yep, exactly.
Highlighting the things that matter, eliminating or reducing the things that are not important.
Well said.
Awesome, Justyn.
Awesome. Thanks, Tanuja.
Thank you so much. This was great, and thank you all for being such a great audience and for asking your questions. And we look forward to seeing you at GCMC and on other Facebook Lives coming soon.
Yep.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.